All right. It is 4 o'clock on Tuesday, June 27th, and we will call the Kerrville City Council workshop to order. At this time, do we have any speakers? No, ma'am. All right. We will recess into executive session under active shooter incident management training 551.076 and 551.089. And to B, Stop the Bleed, 551.076 and 551.089. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, raise your right hand. And we will recess at 4 o'clock into executive session.
Yep.
All right, tell us what we need to do, Jack. So at, excuse me, I'm cold. Sleepy. Where's Joe?
He's getting.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna come down tomorrow. I'll suggest we're not gonna go mounted. I don't want to take it back.
Thank you again. Appreciate it.
Ma'am, thank you.
All right.
We are live.
Great.
We're live, aren't we? Okay. At 5:30, we will close the executive session, move back into the regular workshop, and there is no action to be taken after the executive session, and we will move to 4A, grading permit presentation.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Good afternoon, Drew.
Hi, Drew.
Thank you.
You? Thank you.
Oh, Mr. Paxton. You. Doing wonderful. Thank you.
Feels like there's more airflow on this tonight than normal. Ooh. All right, take it away, Drew.
Good afternoon. This is grading permit. Just wanted to give kind of an introduction to the ordinance, a little bit of background of what Code Review Committee discussed, and answer any initial questions before we bring it back for your consideration. Over the course of 22 and 2023, we met with Code Review Committee. 7 of those meetings, we discussed the grading permit. We did start with clearing, tree removal, and grading. Ultimately, the Code Review Committee decided on that grading was the only permit that they were recommending. We did not include clearing and tree removal. And of course, again, the recommendation is what you have before you is what they ended up with is they chewed on this for, again, 7 separate meetings. So just to go through a couple pictures and examples that they looked at to get some of the terminology straight. This would be an example of a cut and clearing. As you can tell, they've done some vegetative clearing down this proposed right-of-way, and obviously they did some cut on the side of the hill there. This is one example on Lehman that we saw that was initially just clearing. Then eventually they did, of course, do grading and a cut and fill with the building permit and the project, the final project on that one. This is Cowley Boulevard in Holtworth, where we've seen over the years as a series of clearing, grading, and cut and fills as they've worked on those properties. This is Leslie Drive and Easy Street. This is a project where they developed a portion of the property, and then they did some clearing and grading and cut and fill on the entire property. So part of it was under a permit, a building permit, part of it was not. Just wanted to go through some of the key points of the ordinance and then open for questions. As the Code Review Committee went through this, trying to figure out what that threshold was necessary for a permit, they landed on any disturbance of land 1 acre or more, unless it was adjacent to a floodplain, creek, or river. And then the threshold, I guess, increased to 1/4 acre or more of disturbance, required a permit. The permit is not required if the project has approved civil plans, approved floodplain permit, and approved building permit. And just to make a distinction there, the floodplain permit is required if there is any work in the FEMA floodplain. They recommended the 1/4 acre of disturbance if the property had floodplain on it, but they weren't doing work in the floodplain. So if you were adjacent to the floodplain or the creek, but not actually in the FEMA floodplain, you're working on the upper end of the property doing grading, still wanted to require the permit to show that the drainage was not going to negatively impact the drainage areas. That's a small distinction between those two. And we've got a number of projects, obviously, that obtain the floodplain permit because they actually are working in the FEMA floodplain, either to elevate the property or elevate the building. That was the fine distinction they made between those two. And then just to buzz through some of the permit standards that are in the ordinance, the applicant will submit their drainage plan and stormwater pollution prevention plan if required. The applicant will show the intended use of the property. I know some of these are before there is an intended use, so obviously that may not be any information, maybe blank or unknown at that time. If you are just stockpiling material, it's limited to 180 days before they start, spreading it out and working the material into a building pad or whatever the purpose of the fill is. No grading shall exceed 3 horizontal to 1 vertical without a signed and sealed geotech report and civil engineering report. No cut or fill shall exceed 6 feet without a signed and sealed geotech and civil engineering report. Grading permit expires in 180 days, and the erosion control devices must be in place prior to the land disturbance and be maintained until completion of that grading. And then, of course, the city shall require any evidence of compliance with TCEQ and their standards for some of the larger projects. With that,
The 180 days that it mentions there for stockpiling of dirt or other fill material, is that, that could be dispersed and rain could send it a lot of places. That seems like, is that a normal time? 180 days?
I don't know that we looked at any comparisons on that. The committee just wanted to make sure that material wasn't placed on site somewhere and then just left.
Never.
So it needs to be graded out, worked, and vegetated as required by TCEQ and not just left as piles, if you will.
Drew, would some of the piles be what we see on 173 across from River Hill,
Yes,
where the church is going? Okay.
that would be an example. I don't know what their initial or total game plan. I know they're looking to elevate the property, the site. So their intention is to grade that, but that would be an example. We don't want it to sit like that for the next 2 or 3 years without further work being done.
The terms of the application, in terms of what they're required to give, is that described in the ordinance, or is that just general that Development Services gets to, at their discretion, get to choose what's on the application?
There's a few things in the standards here that reference the application.
Okay.
Otherwise, it was just the information that we would use to collect that contact information.
Okay.
And this, the application and some of the information on here was a combination of, I think it's Bernie's and Fredericksburg's applications.
Also, like on Lehman, when they graded it all, they did all those things. They were required to come back then with whatever they put on the top.
Yes.
They spray it with,
Yeah, so they
something,
did
right?
they did the stabilization, hydromulch or planting. So that one came through several phases through development. The
okay,
initial clearing, was obviously what got everyone's attention when they cleared all the cedar and shredded it. That would not have required a grading permit, because they didn't actually grade or move any dirt. They only cut the plants, they cut the cedar. Obviously, later on, once this project was in place, then they started their grading, their cut and fill, actually moving dirt at that point, moving soil. That would have been, I don't know the exact timing, most likely that would not have required a grading permit, because by the time they got to that point, they had civil construction plans approved with the city engineer's office. So that one actually went through a couple different phases. The initial clearing would not have required a permit, then into their civil construction, then into their building permit.
and the way they finished it off, that's part of this. I mean, they had to do that.
It's more actually part of TCEQ's requirements.
Okay, oh, it is, oh, okay, okay. Any other questions, council? This took a lot of delving into, and we appreciate what the code committee did. This is good.
And they went from, I would say, from both extremes, from we don't need this to let's include everything, and then back to grading and kind of dialed in on the grading portion of it.
Okay. Well, I think it's good. I think it's very good. So, I think it was needed. All right, we are not voting on anything, so unless there are any other questions, council?
This will be at our next regular, not tonight's, but following tonight's next regular meeting on our agenda for consideration on first reading, is that right?
I don't think I've got it on the schedule yet.
Okay, so probably not that soon.
July or August.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, council, is there anything else before we adjourn the workshop? All right, at 5:41, we will adjourn the city council workshop.